Nice to see everyone today. We're in the final stretch, so hang in there. Again, my name is Lehman. I am going to switch gears a little bit and have us talk about customer experiences, which is something I think about every day. I lead loyalty and CRM at Macy's. Prior to that, I was in various marketing roles at Calvin Klein, and then also worked in various loyalty and customer engagement roles at Starbucks. With me today are two very interesting people who probably think about customer just as often, if not more than I do. So I'd love for you to quickly introduce yourselves and we'll get right into it.
Thank you. My name is Djalal. I'm one of the founders of Ometria. We are a customer data experience platform. And our purpose, our core focus is to make sure that brands create incredible customer experiences, but at the same time, gain team efficiency and also drive sustainable revenue.
And I'm Todd Adest. I have been with Ad Marketplace for 3.5 years. We're paid search and performance. I've done stints at Newstar, Microsoft, Innovators, Nike. I have done it all. So excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. So maybe just to start off with, can you share a little bit about what lasting customer experiences mean to you? What does that actually mean?
When we were prepping for this call, I cited some examples, and I talk to my team quite often about this. And for me, it's really about customer service and your experience with a brand. And in my opinion, and yes, the self-deprecation is real, Chick-fil-A is one of the best examples. When you walk into a Chick-fil-A, and raise your hand if you've been, okay, quite a few, they teach their employees something that is lost today. And it's a secret called please and thank you. Just the delightful experience that you have with a consumer can really create loyalty in the long term. So, it's those customer experiences that you have, whether offline or online, that really fuel, the interaction that you have with the consumer long term.
What about you, Djalal?
Yes, ultimately, I think it's important to understand what customer experience is. It's such an umbrella term for many, many things, and I think it's very different for every single brand. Whether you're selling potatoes, burgers, I have an example of ice cream. We're going from fashion to food very quickly, but there's a brand, Milk, and I think someone actually mentioned it earlier. But when I moved out to New York during COVID, I was trying to get some ice cream, and I ordered something to DoorDash, and I received this package, and they had this handwritten note saying, "Hi Djalal, happy Wednesday, I hope you're having a very sweet day," with a smiley and a heart. And I think that's a perfect example that at that particular point in time, that customer experience created a connection with that particular brand. And I think that's something that you can translate across any industry, any vertical. So ultimately the customer experience is connecting with your customer in a way that is most relevant at the time and that is specific and authentic to them.
I got one more for you. My favorite example, Chewy. Any of you own a pet? Chewy is by far the most incredible company. I have friends who've lost their pet, and Chewy will send them a bouquet of flowers. I consistently am reminded of my dog's birthdays, which I never ever track, because I get a birthday card from those guys. So yeah, it's that interaction that makes things super special.
It's super clear that there's a lot of these make or break moments when it comes to your interaction with a company or a brand that will keep your loyalty forever or have you break up with the brand forever. And I think everybody in this audience, certainly from what I've heard from the two of you, have had experiences in either category. For me, it's that airlines come to me first and foremost because they were the first pioneers of loyalty and how to think about engaging that customer. But I remember one experience where I was getting on a flight, my luggage did fit the luggage rack, thank you very much, but the gate agent told me otherwise, and I was just livid and was ready to walk off that airplane and break up forever with that airline. And then one of the flight attendants slid me a handwritten note, knowing how angry and upset I was, and told me that the next few drinks were on him and those kind of things. And so just two very counter examples in the span of 30 minutes that really made me interact or think about a brand in a very different way. When I think about loyalty, it's loyalty to the point of rationality. And again, think about the travel examples, like driving an additional 5 miles to another hotel that's further away from where you want to go, just because they know you and they have your pillow fluff just right and know exactly where they want your room to be. When I was at Starbucks, It's really thinking about how we give you the right and most relevant offer. So, I've been in focus groups where customers have said, I will buy that string cheese from my phone at 11 o'clock at night because I just want to meet your challenge of this offer so I can get my points. These types of examples really resonate as things that you're willing to do because you're so engaged. And certainly from what you said, Todd, I don't think you're gonna ever break up with Chewy.
Not
I
yet.
don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I buy my kids food there too.
So 2023 is a pretty challenging year, as I'm sure many can relate to, and as we're all facing in our everyday lives. Where do you think the consumer mindset is? So let's just paint the backdrop of where we are as we look at the macroeconomic environment, all the different noise of consumer headwinds. What is that? What do you think? Where do you think consumers are?
Yeah, so this is something that I am absolutely involved in on a daily basis. And really what it comes down to is analyzing the consumer journey. And what we found through the economic headwinds is that loyalty actually doesn't really exist unless it's a really extra special experience. Today it's about value, it's about timeliness, it's about relevancy and delivery, right? So the question becomes, how has Amazon become such a habitual purchase? How many people have been on Amazon in the last week? Raise your hand. Thank you. How many were on Amazon today? Raise your hand. Exactly. So the question becomes, how did that become so habitual? And it's that ease of execution, it's the speed of delivery, and it's the value that's being presented. And the funniest part is, the value isn't always the best on Amazon, and that there are other areas where you can really get that value and the delivery. Walmart, as an example. So I think at the end of the day, the headwinds today have created an opportunity for jump balls that have never been available before. And I think you compound that by the fact that the increase in online usage, apps and on web, the increase of usage, the increase of adoption and purchasing online, I think it was said before, who the hell goes shopping anymore? I mean, those things have fueled competition in a way that's never existed before, because when you used to go into a shopping mall, you were limited only to the choices of the physical environment. So we're just in a different landscape today. And then, I could go on for days, you throw in all of those brands that have now gone direct to consumer versus going through retail channel partners. And it just makes this a very messy, interesting landscape of those jump balls and who gets considered by a consumer while they're searching for a brand, a product, or a service.
What would you add, Djalal?
Yeah, I think it's important to look at the macroeconomic level as well. I think over the last 2 years we've gone through a business or software recession, or whatever you want to call it, a slowdown. Lots of layoffs, lots of tightening across many areas. And the more brands, the more people I speak to, I think everyone's getting ready for a consumer recession. There are many ways around it, but if you look at consumer spending, that hasn't slowed down over the last 2 years. However, it's about to. Interest rates are unlikely to go down. People will be tightening their spend. Instead of getting the iPhone 15, you're probably going to wait till the 17 or whatever the number will be. Mortgage payment's going to go up. Instead of buying a new car, you're going to wait 4 or 5 years. And ultimately, spending on things you didn't really need before is probably going to go away over the next few years. So a lot of the brands I've been speaking to, a lot of the analysis I've been looking at, there will be consumer tightening. So that's why a lot of companies, whether it's in fashion or any other vertical, a huge shift from focus on growth, as that's what was rewarded over the last decade, unfortunately. Extreme growth, spending lots of money on acquiring customers, even though they don't come back and buy again. So a lot of brands are now focusing from revenue to profitability and team efficiency to make up for the unfortunate wave of consumer tightening that's about to happen.
Rainbow and sunshine over here.
Sorry, guys.
Well, let's talk about the positive in light of this opportunity. And I think there is an opportunity to demonstrate value in different ways than maybe just price. There are ways that companies can lean into that connection with their customers that go beyond that transaction. What have you seen to be effective from the clients and the brands that you work with, and how are they solving for some of these challenges?
Yeah, so a lot of the brands that we work with and spoken to, there's also spending spree of technology, right? I think someone mentioned the Lumascape, a whole bunch of different technologies, ESPs, CDPs, CDNPs, you name it, right? Point solutions. There's so many different technologies, and brands have acquired every single piece of one of them. Some of them have multiple technologies doing the same thing. There was also digital transformation that happened over the last decade where we've gotten so much data, and a recent Forrester report mentioned that brands are only using 20 to 30% of data. So we've collected all this data, we're paying for all this data, but we're not actually using that data to understand our customers. So the first initiative that I see now to improve the customer experience and to drive loyalty is, one, to identify and understand the data that brands can be leveraged to truly understand their customers and be authentic in the way they communicate with them. And most importantly, how do you then consolidate or effectively leverage the technologies that you have today, or getting new technologies to be able to drive that customer experience that will drive loyalty, sustainable revenue. Because in the past few years, you had a target to hit. You go out, send a few messages, few newsletter blasts, you have a spike in revenue, and you're good to go. Now that has a significant impact on long-term customer lifetime value that you have to take into consideration. And understanding how your customers behave through customer data is probably the single most important thing that a lot of the brands are trying to focus on today.
So oftentimes when you talk about a customer transformation, not too far behind is this concept of digital transformation. Do you see those to be fairly interlinked?
Yes and no. I think digital transformation could be dangerous because we have focused a lot. I mean, as humans, individuals, the way that we communicate and the way that we shop has radically changed over the last 10 years, right? We buy a lot more online. We have mostly Zoom meetings these days, right? Especially less people, fewer people coming into the office and having human interactions ultimately. One fascinating stat that I saw the other day is that we spend 11 hours and 20 minutes looking at screens per day, which is 75% of the time that we are awake, which is ridiculous. I think social media usage has doubled over the last 5 years. 80% of the data that we have online today, or actually anywhere, is unstructured data, so video, social, photos, these kind of things, and 85% of decision-making of a consumer before they make a purchase is based on user-generated content like social media. So on the one hand, digital transformation can help, but it's also a way for a lot of people to substitute human connections with technologies. I don't know, let's throw product recommendations in there, and we effectively automatically assume that that will substitute the connection we're trying to build.
So how do you break through to that? To the theme of this session, we're talking about creating lasting customer experiences. So we're in front of screens more, people are shopping online more, there's a lot of headwinds around us, lots of noise and clutter. So what's the breakthrough?
Yeah, I think, Kenneth spoke to it this morning, and it's really the theme of today, and it's that brand purpose, right? So I think today more than ever, brand to demand is a really key concept that marketers are struggling with. It's that short-term revenue hit of we need to hit profitability, we need to increase margins, we need to actually run a business. And then on the other side, it's we also need to create loyalty, we need to create lifetime value. So the connection between the two are pretty interesting. And I've seen some really amazing examples in the marketplace. So obviously Kenneth has one. My favorite examples are the Home Depot. The Home Depot is absolutely a fantastic organization. And what they've been able to do is really tap into their philanthropic cause, which is veterans. And it's brilliant because they do events each year, donate millions of dollars to veterans causes, but they legitimately rebuild veteran homes retirement homes around the country. And in doing so, not only are they supporting the people that shop at the Home Depot, which are largely veterans, specifically contractors, they're also supporting their employees, which are also veterans. So really brilliant play to make sure that they are serving the people that are serving them, right? So for me, I think that's a really great example of tying that brand purpose. The demand part of it comes with it, right? Because now it's that loyalty, it's that vision, it's that connection to a brand that really can't be erased. How do you say no to somebody who is fighting for veterans? That's a tough one, right? versus mental health, which may not necessarily coincide or resonate with everyone. It really is about that brand and the connection of what they're doing, what's on their shelves, who's actually shopping there, and making sure that those lead to actual purchases and that lifetime value.
But how do you recommend the prioritization against this? You know, what I'm hearing from Djalal is that brands are really leaning into driving profit versus just growth, which was the case a few years ago, even last year, and needing to make sure that profitability comes through between. So how do you prioritize between that and what you're describing, which is really investing in the brand experience and the brand purpose, and potentially the media that follows it?
Well, that's where the nerdy stuff comes in, right? So that's where all the data, the measurement, the analytics come in. That's where your MMM models come in. That's where everything that you're doing from a budget allocation perspective really starts to take hold of the business. And so aligning, and we heard some of it earlier today, but aligning the CFO, the CEO with the CMO is something that has kind of eluded a lot of these organizations, and just making sure that everybody is really aligned, really tight on the strategy in order to get both. And obviously that's a real challenge and a balance between the two. But that alignment internally is so incredibly important to determine where you're going to go, what you're going to do, and how you're going to do it.
Anything to add there, Djalal?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing is focus. So I think a lot of brands, a lot of businesses have so many different things that they have to, so many initiatives that they have to complete or finish. I think right now, given the restrictions and resources and budget, it's very important to find one single most important thing that your brand wants to achieve over the next 12 to 18 months and just double down on that. That in effect will also remove silos within departments, silos within data, because if you have one common goal, one key focus that you're trying to optimize for, everyone rally together to actually achieve it. And that ultimately comes to the customer experience when you're trying to deliver to your customers, and what is your brand principles, values, what are you trying to communicate. So if you focus on that one thing, it'll be much easier to create a very compelling offering to make sure that whoever you're targeting understand what your brand is about, and therefore drive loyalty in return.
I want to get back to what you originally mentioned was around digital and the impact and the relationship of digital to physical. And really, many of us, most of us operate in an omni-channel context. That customer connection can be most clear and manifested when you have that interaction one-to-one with the other person on the other side, but digital can obfuscate that. Are there ways in which digital can empower that and to amplify that? And what are those ways?
So I'm going to kiss up a little bit. Your Star Wars, amazing, and definitely entice people, right? So for me, what I have found and what we see is that, especially for high-price ticket items, and especially now in a down economy where people really value their dollars, they want to feel, they want to see, they want to touch, they want to measure, they want to look at the items before they buy them. Nobody's buying a refrigerator online sight unseen. Nobody's buying a television set, usually, unless they've done a ton of research that goes into it, right? They're walking into stores and they're seeing that. So the question becomes, how do you connect that offline, the online to the offline in a way that's relevant? It's the relevancy. It's by serving the consumer with the information that they're looking for in the easiest way possible. It is that customer experience that we referenced before, digitally, that is going to fuel it, right? And so if you look at some of the great examples, and Kenneth Cole is a great example if you've not been to their site, clean, simple, easy. You find exactly what you're looking for. It's right up front and center, versus some of the cluttered pages, and now you get into retail media where you can't really trust, or you see that there's some stuff on the site, and you're like, okay, I get it, that's not really what I'm looking for. So I think relevancy plays a huge role in digital. And what we don't talk about quite often is the impact of artificial intelligence, right? So as we talk about the transformation of digital, I think a lot of people talk about how they're going to lose their job as a result of artificial intelligence. I don't think many people are really coming forward and saying, here's how it's going to help the consumer experience. And I think that's going to be a key component to, again, creating that relevancy and that loyalty.
So Gen AI has really come into the conversation, especially this year, and certainly the landscape and the set of tools that is available to a brand and marketer. So to your point, how do you best harness it in a way that further underscores your purpose and that authenticity and relevance versus let it take over?
I mean, I don't want to monopolize all the time. The way that I feel is that any consumer interaction, it can't be about what you want. It needs to be about what you can offer. And if you are offering value to a consumer in whatever that means to the consumer, and if you are led with the consumer's needs, you're going to win every single time. So how does generative AI access that? It's really through the inputs. It's really through what that user is looking for and what they need. I saw an example that was delivered yesterday by Meta. They showed an example of a golfer who, in generative AI, said, hey, I've got a shot, it's 235 yards away at an 85-degree slope. And the generative AI literally told them exactly what club, how to hit it, asked about the wind, pulled up the weather report. I mean, that is a value-based interaction where now, just by a simple input, you're getting a ton of data back, a ton of information back to make your life a little bit better.
Great example. Djalal?
So many things to unpack with AI, right? I mean, it's the hottest topic these days. I think 100% agree with what Todd said. Ultimately, AI is not here to replace humans, right? It's to help them be more efficient. I always use this analogy of a pilot. I asked this question to ask, and I think a lot of people already heard this question, but I'm not going to ask it today. I'm just going to give you the answer. But a flight from London to LAX is about 11 hours and 20 minutes. Actually, exactly the same time that we spend on screens. It's a pure coincidence, but the pilot actually spends only 6 minutes manually controlling the plane, right? So out of the other sort of, let's say, 11 hours and whatever minutes, everything else is automated for the pilot. I mean, I'm not sure either one of us would board a plane with no pilot, maybe not yet, but I personally wouldn't, and I'm not that scared of flying either. But a lot of the stuff, a lot of the data is processed, but pilot is nonetheless absolutely vital. They set the destination. If something goes wrong, they can jump in. They have full transparency what's happening, but a lot of this stuff, all the manual work is being done for them. And that's why I kind of bring the two together with a marketer or with anyone working the brand. Let's face it, brands have to work, or marketers have to work 12 hours a day these days. And instead of doing things like manual segmentation or manual campaign optimization, or even writing manual content across 5 different languages or whatever you're trying to promote this particular week, you should be leveraging AI and the technologies available to you today to maximize your workflow so you can focus on the things that matter. And the things that matter is something that the AI cannot recreate. Our brains are very powerful, right? We have trillions of neurons and synapses that are being processed every millisecond. We're creative, we have empathy, we have emotional intelligence that AI cannot yet recreate. So rather than doing manual stuff, get the AI to do it for you, and then spend your time actually focusing on the things that matter, that create that human connection, and ultimately drives better customer experiences and loyalty.
That's scary. Also, have you guys heard about this AI model? Apparently there is a model on Instagram that has over 1 million followers, gathered those 1 million followers within a week, and is completely AI generated. Insane. So you've got brands.
What is the category?
I think it's fashion. And thank you for the question. It's interesting because you have brands stepping up and stepping out and saying, hell no, that is not how we're going to interact with our consumers. Last week on a Brand Innovator stage, we heard from Aerie, owned by American Eagle Outfitters, bras, women wear, shapewear, whatever you call it, sorry. And they are all about image, and they're all about in real life. And their models are their actual customers. And it is about improving body image and perception of body image. And they have established that they will never use AI in their creative. They will never Photoshop anything that they do because there is authenticity, there's sincerity about the connection that they have with their consumer. Something like that is definitely going to create loyalty with a brand.
For me, it's definitely this combination of the human brain and the machine brain that offers a very potent opportunity. But I think the human brain must always supersede, right? Like the machine can only tell you so much, the algorithms can only say one thing, and it's this balance of art and science where the human brain offers that contextual awareness that goes beyond what the models or the algorithms can tell you to really create these authentic experiences, to your point. Todd, you mentioned that there needs to be alignment as we look at needing to be much more focused this year, especially given all that's going on, and how to create that organizational alignment among various functions. As we think about the customer and all the different functions, right? I belong to a function that has customer in its title, but there are other functions where that isn't the case. But how do we inject that customer mindset and centricity in all areas of a company in order to create that North Star vision?
Such a great question. I love retailers. I love QSRs. I love when a company has interactions with consumers. And what I love even more is when those executives actually take the time once a year, if that, to actually work in those environments with customers directly. So the interaction with consumers directly is so incredibly important. The feedback, the community that you're building, and an understanding what is working, what isn't working, and just have that constant flow of information takes you out of the numbers and back to that contextual brain, right? So really leading with purpose with regards to that consumer experience. So, for me, it's take your head out of the clouds, stop looking at screens for 11 hours a day, and actually start talking to people to find out how they feel. There were a lot of jokes made today about, people listening to their children. I gotta tell you, I've got 3 kids. I am the creepiest dad in the world. I am looking over their shoulder constantly, my wife too, to see how they're interacting with their devices, what they're doing, what they're downloading, how they're actually navigating these different devices to see what it is they're doing. That is less about the analytics, and that is more just about that contextual relevancy of understanding the human and the human behaviors that just doesn't come with those analytics unless you're doing MRI scans, unless you're doing heat mapping, unless you're doing all of those weird things that are available today, probably aren't so common practice.
I'm a parent too, and I can tell you that kids will always tell you the truth, whether you like to hear it or not.
Exactly.
What do you think, Jalal?
Can't comment on the kids, but definitely agree with just listening to your customers, asking them even the most basic questions to get a better understanding of their experience. I think one, starting with the basics, and you mentioned omnichannel earlier. There's so many brands that I absolutely love that have an incredible in-store experience, but because even the basics are not connected, every time I go online, they no longer know who I am. Or vice versa. I can shop online, go into the store, and they'll treat me like I'm a first-time customer. So focusing on the basics, breaking down the silos, connecting the data, but most importantly, I think no matter how much we want to ignore it or try to ignore it, you can no longer push the boundaries of customer experience without analyzing data, right? Because there's so much data everywhere. We're not using that data. And I mentioned earlier, 80% of data today is user-generated content, which without AI was impossible to analyze and use to then create a customer experience. But so many different permutations are happening every second that it is no longer humanly possible to analyze and use to make marketing decisions or brand decisions or business decisions. So yes, on the one hand, absolutely speak to your customers, understand what your brand is about, make your brand authentic, but always test, iterate with the data that you have today, because it's impossible to succeed without leveraging that. I think it's always very hard to find a balance, and something that we as a software business struggle with as well, identifying who the target audience is and then ultimately leveraging the data, but having the right balance is what's going to get you to the next stage.
I can relate and also probably speak for many in the audience to say we're never lacking data, but it's also understanding what the right data is and how to best use it. And you talked about this acronym soup, the systems and tools and data earlier. So how do you get to the heart of what the data should really tell you and what to do with it amongst the sea and proliferation of data, especially given UGC, in which you're getting much more data than you've ever had before through the user or customer?
I think we always start with data or technology versus what we're trying to achieve. I think it's most of the conversations I've had is like, okay, what technology do you have, or what data sources do you have, versus ultimately trying to understand the ultimate objective. For example, we've been working with a customer who sells footwear, and rather than starting with identifying what data sources they have and what they ingest and how much user-generated content we're ingesting and processing, is about understanding what you're trying to achieve as a customer experience. And it was ultimately trying to understand whether there are any differences between the online buyer and the offline buyer, and what is the difference between a hybrid buyer. So that was the key objective, and we quickly identified using the data that a hybrid buyer is actually about 20% more profitable and valuable and has a much higher loyalty than a one-off online buyer or a one-off in-store buyer. So once we've identified, leveraging data, that hybrid customers have a much higher customer lifetime value, we then started to build the tech and the data sources that are necessary to drive more hybrid customers. So how do you get more hybrid customers? Then you look at product affinity, you look at behavioral patterns. If you buy this particular pair of shoes online, are you then likely to buy this pair offline or vice versa? So it's really starting with the objective of what you're trying to achieve, using the data to highlight some of the insight. For example, hybrid customers are much more valuable, and then using the technology and the data you have to then drive more hybrid customers. And that's just one of hundreds, if not thousands, of examples. And of course, data will surface that initially for you, but then you have to pick the one that you want to double down on, which goes back to the focus and focusing on one particular thing to drive a better customer experience.
So in that example, how do you get an online-only shopper whose propensity is to just shop digitally into a store and actually make them get in their car, drive to a store, go through that effort, given the fact that that's a higher CLV for the brand?
Yeah. So if you have an online customer, first you need to identify where they live, right? What is the area that they're in, and do you have a store nearby? Or what is the closest location you can get them to? That's probably once again, going back to the basics, right? Because you'll be surprised, a lot of brands don't have that data. They have name, email, but they have no other data sources. Where does this person live in a non-creepy way, and where do they buy, right? So that's step one. Step two is then how do you get that person to an offline store? Is a store nearby? Do you have an event going on? Can you actually recommend or send them something in the post that would get them to go into an offline store? Literally a handwritten note. You're a great customer, come in, we're doing a new launch. And once again, you'd be surprised how much that influences the buying decision. And then ultimately, having an understanding of all the different channels that you can communicate to that person with. Once again, if you send an email inviting that person to come to a store, probably not gonna read it, right? So do you use direct mail? Do you use SMS? Do you have an app? WhatsApp? Push notifications, whatever it might be. And once again, it comes back to identifying what is the preference of that particular customer that is online only to get them to come and make a purchase offline.
What's an experience that could be created only physically?
Well, I've got two great examples.
Go ahead, Todd.
So the first is the New York Jets. I'm a big Jet fan. It's okay.
Sorry,
I know
Padres.
pain. I know pain. The Jets have absolutely no chance of winning the Super Bowl or even making the playoffs this year. I'm very realistic. Been a Jet fan my whole life. Never happened. And yet, tickets for this weekend's game are through the roof and it's completely sold out, but almost unavailable. Why? Because they're playing the Kansas City Chiefs. Star tight end Travis Kelce is dating who? So everyone is trying to buy tickets in an effort to see Taylor Swift be carted out in a popcorn cart, right? So that is just an example of how do you get people to come to a really crappy product that they wouldn't normally come to. All right, so put that aside for a second. When I was at Nike, I think one of the greatest things that we did to drive people to stores was very limited edition releases, and specifically around Air Jordans. So I'm going to tell you, the days that we would release new shoes, there would be lines around the corner of people waiting to get a hold of these shoes. And what was amazing to me, and obviously there's a huge aftermarket, but what was amazing to me is, 100 people into the line, we'd only have size 5, size 6, the weirdest sizes ever, and people were like, just give me what you got. So I think when you create real experiences, I think that's a good component of it. And then secondarily, while I was at Nike, we also used to host incredible events. I set up a boxing ring in the middle of the store one day and had two, Olympic boxers come in and do a display. We had Lance Armstrong come in before he got caught. We had the U.S. soccer team come in. These are things that really pack a store, and obviously with relevancy tied to the brand and tied to what they're selling. So I do think that there is absolutely something to be said for a lot of those events.
And going back to value can manifest in a lot of different ways, and that's why things like dining and entertainment and travel are up this year, despite the compression on consumer spend, because people are still ultimately seeking that experience, that connection. And I fully believe, I'm definitely a softie, so I believe in that power of loyalty in that way. One thing we've seen at Macy's too, something we've done is to open up the stores 2 hours early for our most important, most valuable customers. We did identify those people through data, so that's one way that data helped us make sure we know who you are. And we got someone to get out of bed at 7 a.m. and drive over to an empty store. But to them, and what we heard is, this is theater. It's like walking through a movie, direct quote. So how do we create these types of experiences in light of all these headwinds to really motivate that?
I have an idea for you. You guys should really sponsor the Thanksgiving Day parade.
We'll have to think about that.
Yeah, that might draw a crowd. I'm just saying.
We'll have to think about that. All right, I think we just have a few more minutes. So, any last parting wisdom for us as we think about navigating these headwinds?
I think probably the most important thing is focus and creating an authentic brand. Double down on the most important thing, double down on one most important metric, and just drive that home over the next 12 months.
For me, I'm going to push my children to be airline pilots because apparently it's a pretty easy job. No, for me, I think everything needs to be about the consumer first. Consumer, consumer, consumer. I think if you start with the consumer, if you end with the consumer, you care about their experience, the value that you're driving to them, you're going to win every single time.
I 100% agree, and for me, it's thinking back to the old adage, start with the customer and everything else will follow. So, thank you for your time. Appreciate the pearls of wisdom.